And we are live with our 30th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey everybody, welcome once again to our wonderful rambling episodes, right? Ken and I's brain dump, but I guess we do invite people on, right, Ken?
Yeah, we do manage to do that. So, and speaking of that, I'm gonna properly introduce tonight's guest. It's awesome to have him on, and so it's Dave Ferguson. This is kind of funny for me because on this podcast are the two people that interviewed me for my first official AppSec job. So I've got Dave Ferguson and Seth Law. You know, both people interview me, so it's kind of interesting to be on this podcast with you guys. But yeah, so Dave Ferguson's our guest tonight. Dave is the director of product development at for web application security at Qualis. We worked with both Seth and I worked with Dave Ferguson at Fishnet. Dave's worked at Veracode, Sabre, and as I said, most recently Qualis. He's spoken at Boston Application Security Conference, LastCon, Converge Conference, Triangle, InfoSec 2016. He has a blog, and I'm going to put the link on here shortly to that blog. But yeah, Dave has so much experience in the application security field. We're happy to have him on. Dave, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Ken, Seth, great to be here. I appreciate you inviting me.
It's so weird to have you two. Yeah, it's just crazy.
So Ken, tell us about your experience with application security. Wait. No, we're interviewing Dave.
Explain cross-site request forgery.
Yeah, there you go. That was the fun one, right? That
was my favorite question.
I seem to remember you asking that on and off, right?
Put the pressure on.
Yeah, so Dave and I were, I can't remember at that time. I might have been senior, or you were senior, or we were both principals at Fishnet for a while there. Those were the good old days, right?
Yeah. Well, I went from a newbie with no security experience in 2006 when I started there, to senior security consultant, to principal security consultant, and then managing consultant. And both of us were managing consultants towards the end there.
That's right.
You were the first person I've ever seen give security training. Now I think about it, Dave.
Yep.
That class you gave when you came here to Virginia, that was the first time I'd ever attended a secure code training course.
Yeah, we did that quite a bit back then. Took over from Matt Flick, who did it initially. But yep, that was a fun time to go in and teach developers about security. So you get some students that were really into it and and then some say, "Why am I here?" So
what you're saying is, yeah, not much has changed, right?
Probably not. It's been a while since I taught any classes, but I'm sure nothing much has changed. But it's great when you find those that are interested. You know, those are the guys that should be the security champions at the organization.
Oh yeah, definitely. I was going to say I thought you had fixed it all, and that's why you moved back onto the product side. There was no new challenges on the consulting side, right?
Yeah, we fixed everything.
Okay, good to know. So Ken, we can just call it now. The podcast and everything, we're done.
We're done. Stuff's fixed. No worries.
Yeah, no worries.
Cool. Well, so Seth and I obviously know you really well. And clearly there are people watching who don't know you as well. That's why we have you on. So Dave, if you would be so kind as to share your origin story, your background, how you got into application security, your path to InfoSec for folks, I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. So my background's probably a little bit different than others. So I started as an engineer. I got an aerospace engineering degree. I had grand visions of working on air-breathing propulsion engines for GE or Pratt & Whitney or some such thing. But unfortunately, I graduated when the Cold War had ended. And what were aerospace engineers doing in the early 90s? They were getting laid off. So I had no job opportunities. Ended up getting a job, though, as an engineer, but I was doing a lot of programming in that job. specifically C and C++. And I didn't know C and C++, so I had to learn it on the job. Turned out I liked programming better than I liked engineering. So in the late 90s, I took another job and started doing Java web development. So started doing Java servlets. This is before JSPs existed. And then when JSPs came out, started doing JSPs, which is before things like frameworks like struts came out. So I was doing like really, raw, bare bones web app development at that time. So did that for like 8 years. And towards the end of that, 2004-ish, I started to hear about attacks on web applications, things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting. Didn't know what those things were. So started kind of looking into it, found OWASP, took a day-long course that was being offered. I was in Kansas City at the time. And I just ate everything up in that course and decided, you know what, I think this application security thing may be important. So I'm going to look into maybe see if there's any jobs in that area. And sure enough, throughout 2005, I found Fishnet Security, which was also based in Kansas City. And they were looking for consultants, but I had no security experience. So they kind of took a chance on me just with my web development background and technical background. So I started there in 06 and just took to it like a fish to water, and ended up, really loving my work there. That year in October, I let Netflix know that there was this thing called cross-site request forgery.
It all comes back. We just had Netflix's AppSec manager on a couple episodes ago, and now we've got,
Yep.
the CSRF reemerging. So conversation.
In 2006, there was just a DVD by the mail delivery service, right? There was no streaming. But they didn't have anyone that knew what cross-site request forgery was, believe it or not. Now I have a good friend that's at Netflix and did a talk at Black Hat, and 2,000 people attended, and Will Bankston. I don't know if you guys know him, but I
do.
Okay, so Will's a great guy and works at Netflix now. And but in 2006, I was the one that let them know that their website had no protection against cross-site request forgery. So you could do all kinds of crazy things, like you could add movies to someone's rental queue without their knowledge. You could change their shipping address so you could get their DVDs. You could You could actually change the password on their account, because their forum didn't require entry of the current password, nor did it have any cross-site request forgery protection. So CSRF was a fun thing back then, and that was literally my first year in AppSec. And CNET picked it up, USA Today picked it up, news story. Netflix downplayed it a lot. Oh, no customer details were at risk, blah blah blah. But
yeah, to give some context, like what's funny is while I worked at Fishnet, because I remember us having this conversation, because I was looking for references for CSRF, like publicly, and I was like, Dave, was this you that did this article? Because it was like the this is so long ago. There wasn't a lot, and it was one of the handful of articles actually published about CSRF in the wild. And yeah, sure enough, it was you. That was crazy. I still remember that conversation. It was like surprising. That's how little CSRF was really like acknowledged and out there at the time.
Yeah, I mean, back then that was like, I don't even think CSRF was on the top 10 in 2003, was it?
No, it came out. It made an appearance in 2007 for the first time.
Right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because when I talk CSRF nowadays, that's still the example that I use, because it was such, it was so easy to actually see how it worked, right? The endpoints that were exposed, the session writing that went on, and how it acted. It was impressive, right? So
I wasn't even looking for it. Honestly, I was a Netflix subscriber, and I was just on my Netflix account one day, and I just learned about CSRF and was looking at the URLs. There were GET requests that actually changed. If you wanted to add a movie to your queue, it was a GET request, not a post. So I could see the URL. I'm like, nothing in there that would prevent anyone from doing this attack, right? So I did a few tests, and sure enough, you could do some really interesting things. So I found, after a week, I found someone at Netflix to pay attention to me. I was doing responsible disclosure and the whole thing, right? But it took a week to find anybody that would listen to me. And then once they listened to me on the phone and said, okay, all right, thank you. And then they hung up. And then a month went by, and I would check it every day. Is it anything changing? A month went by. Finally, they added like a token in the request that would be changing, that would prevent the attack. So, at the time, and that's when I disclosed it publicly, after they had added that fix to it. But the thing is, the fix that they did, I think it didn't fix. I'd have to go back and look, but I don't think it fixed every instance of CSRF at the time. But it was close enough. It fixed the worst ones.
Cool.
So it was kind of an early kind of attempt to mitigate that. So, hey, I was going to ask you, around this time, that was is this when you started doing OWASP volunteering around that same time? Was that your vehicle to be more involved in community, to learn more about AppSec?
It was. I ended up leading the Kansas City chapter there for, it was less than a year, because I ended up moving to Texas. But I got involved in the local OWASP chapter. It was kind of defunct at that point. Arian Evans had kind of started it, I believe, and he was leader for a while. And then he had left and went to California. So that opened up me to become the chapter leader there. And so that was a good experience. Recruiting speakers was the most difficult things back then. So that was 2007. Yeah, I've been involved in OWASP really since late 2006, early 2007. And wrote another thing I did was on Fishnet, when I was doing the pen testing, application assessments day in and day out. I was finding that the forgot password feature of these web apps was completely insecure in most cases. Either it delivered a temporary password by email, or it did, something that invariably was not secure. And so I kind of collected all this information about all these assessments I was doing, and wrote a white paper that was then the basis for the OWASP forgot password cheat sheet. So that's still out there today. It's been modified and enhanced over time. But that was probably 2008, 2009 timeframe. So that was the one cheat sheet that I have to my credit.
Yeah. Once again, something we all used for reference. We would write reports. Genuinely, that was what we all kind of looked to, was that advice.
Yeah, and there's nothing technically advanced about it. It's mostly common sense, in my opinion, but not everyone was doing it right. Most people were not doing it right.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised, right? I mean, we still run into quite a bit of that, where the forgot password is kind of the forgive me, Ken, redheaded stepchild of authentication and authorization, or the authentication function, right? We forget about it a lot. So, I mean, it's still one of my favorite places to poke holes in when I'm looking at a web app, right? Or even a mobile app, right? It seems like we repeat this cycle of, hey, we do forgot password here, but now we have an API endpoint that does the same thing, and we have just as many problems with it.
Yep.
No, I remember you doing that paper and that research. We did post some links to all of that. I even found like the SC magazine article for CSRF or CSRF that I threw up there. So if people are interested to read about it, they can.
Yep, cool. So so that was kind of the Fishnet timeframe. So I guess that kind of covers my origin story. But there is one interesting sort of side conversation that happened before I started in security. I was writing web apps, and I was working for a company that wrote web applications for the higher education industry. So colleges and universities, things for like paying your bill and registering for classes and those kind of things. Web front end for that kind of process. This was like 2001, 2002 timeframe that I was writing these web apps. And like I said, it was JSPs at the time, straight JSP apps. And like 10 years later, actually at this point now, I've had 2 children who I've gone on to pay their tuition for their college. And it was using my web app to pay their tuition that I wrote. So, I mean, I pulled up, I did view source. I'm like, I wrote this web app. Here I am paying tuition on it.
What a weird circle.
Yeah, that is odd.
It was 2 different colleges too. It wasn't even the same college. So,
wait, so for how long was the code up? Like, was it
that code has been in production for more than 15 years.
Oh
I mean, it's
what?
been modified. It's been modified. So it's not my original code. It's been enhanced, modified over time, but it's probably 75, 80% the same.
That sounds right. And when people are like, "Oh, how do vulnerabilities get introduced?"
Yeah, and when I wrote that, I didn't know anything about any of the vulnerabilities. So, but I didn't. I wish I'd had the foresight to build in some sort of a backdoor for myself that I could like maybe bypass that tuition payment.
At least reduction, a nice 20% reduction.
Something, some special parameter with a unique key that no one would ever guess, but I had hidden away somewhere for just in the future.
And remember that when you're reviewing source code to look for backdoors in source code.
Yeah, static analysis though would have definitely caught that, I think. Well, I don't know, depending on the quality of the static analysis tool.
You just embed it in one of the libraries somewhere. You're fine. It's no big deal.
Yeah.
Cool. So can you tell folks a little bit about what you currently do at Qualis?
Yeah. So, well, kind of another interesting fact there is when I started at Fishnet in 2006, I started to use some new tools that I'd never used before, and one of them was Qualis. At that time, it was network infrastructure scans. They didn't web app scans from Qualis at that time, but so I was using Qualis and I used WebInspect for web app scans. And at the time, I remember not really understanding the difference between the 2 types of scans. So that's how green I was. And now here I am at Qualis. I'm the product manager, actually. Official title is Director of Product Management for Web Application Scanning here at Qualis. So I'm responsible for the direction of the product, for enhancements, roadmap, and also, customer satisfaction, basically everything about the product. We have over 3,000 customers on our web app scanning product, growing all the time. And so it's a challenging role, but I get to use a little bit of everything I've done in the past. I mean, I did the web development, so I know that side of things. I work with developers every day, so that helps. The consulting side of that Fishnet, when I was doing application assessments, I mean, that's what our tool basically is. It's an automated application pen test, so that helps. I also haven't talked about it yet, but after I left Fishnet, I went to Veracode, also a vendor. Software as a service, cloud-based, just like Qualis. So I have that experience under my belt. That helps me with my current job. And then after Veracode, I went to work for Sabre Corporation, which is in the travel industry, basically technology for the travel industry. And I was on the information security team there, so enterprise security job. That was kind of one area that I didn't have any experience with. Here I was, at Fishnet, I would go into clients and talk about what they needed to do to fix their problems. At Veracode, I would go and I would sell Veracode services to some big enterprise. But I had never worked in a big enterprise myself in an InfoSec role. So I did that for a little over 2 years, and that was also a great experience. I got to see down the trenches how InfoSec people, how their lives are every day. And so I kind of all those different experiences in my past have helped me in what I do now. So I understand our customers' perspective. I understand how to make the product better. Of course, there's a lot of different aspects to that. Which vulnerabilities do you need to focus on in the scanning tool? Do you need to enhance the UI, or do you really need to focus on the scanning engine? Do you somehow balance and do both? Because at Qualis, we really focus on enterprise features for helping our customers be successful with their web app scanning program and their security program in general. So that's what I'm doing now. Enjoy it. I get to travel, conferences. Missed you guys at Black Hat this year, but I usually see you there, Black Hat and DEF CON.
Usually, just this year was a little bit different. We were both kind of, we were both slammed. I mean, I think that was a crazy, and you left you left, we were just talking about it before, you left on Friday, so you weren't there for the whole weekend, which was, the majority of the time I was there, the all of 2 days I was there.
Yep, I wasn't there for the craziness of DEF CON this year. So
that's okay with the 26,000, 28,000 people, whatever, that are there now. You don't even run into anybody that you know as it is, right? You have to coordinate.
Which is funny because I was about to make a comment on how small the security world is, because Dave, it was funny. If I remember correctly, I was working at Living Social and I hop on a call about Veracode. And because we were looking at it as a solution for some of our PHP apps, I think it was you, Dave. You were on it was the sales guy, and you.
Yeah,
so
I remember that. I didn't remember it until you just mentioned it right now. But yep, I was on that call.
Yeah. So was I? I literally just left Fishnet to go to Living Social. So that was the strangest thing. Like, here's my former kind of boss. You're a principal, and now you're pitching me products for Veracode. So yeah, when we talk about the AppSec community being small, it definitely is. But yeah, so like one of the questions I had was from 2013 to 2018. What in terms of, I'm just giving out a general range of time, but like, what are the differences in terms of like what a dynamic scanner needs to be able to handle? Like, what are the things that you're facing today that you weren't facing a year or two ago? Like, what's changing? What do you foresee being different? I'd love to hear your insight on that.
Well, I think dynamic scanning, there's always going to be a need for it. But I think what's changed is it's probably a piece of the puzzle now, where maybe it used to be more the main testing method of a web app. So I think now you need to look at different approaches, especially for your business critical, mission critical web apps. You got to do pen testing to find business logic flaws or authenticate, weird convoluted authentication issues that an automated tool could never find. And then there's the software composition analysis that, it seems to be a lot of the breaches happening now are from vulnerable components being sucked into the application that, the developers at the organization didn't write. But the struts, vulns, or what have you. So I think mainly what's changed is the need to have a more well-rounded testing approach. One thing that I personally, it's funny because we just talked about teaching developers secure code training. This may be controversial, but I don't know that that's the most valuable use of time and money, because of the fact that some students don't get much out of it. I would even say maybe most of them don't get much out of it. And then you don't know if those students in the class are actually going to be writing critical code in the application. But my opinion is developers just don't need that training necessarily, but the testing aspect is more important.
Do you think so? I mean, is it the quality of the training or the type of training, or is it just doesn't matter if it's the best, trainer you can think of and the best sort of like interactive, they're going to remember this content type of training? Like, it doesn't matter. It's just not necessarily applicable to the developer, or definitely expand, because it is controversial. It is definitely a controversial opinion.
I think that it's mostly about the students. Even if you have the best trainer like Jim Manico, right? Awesome trainer you guys just had on. He's like the best trainer there is. But if you have students that just don't care, then it's not going to matter. So I think that the security champions that you've identified, those guys should definitely be going to secure code training, because they can have the knowledge, basically, there'll be boots on the ground, on the development teams. So I think, that inside knowledge is better than training 100% of developers. So just because I think like a new developer who's just coming into the field, they may not be actually coding a lot of applications where the vulnerabilities are introduced, especially with the frameworks now that kind of prevent a lot of the vulnerabilities. So I like the idea, and I believe it's more valuable to have really highly trained and highly educated and motivated security champions versus blindly training everybody, 100% of developers on secure code training.
And to like kind of clarify what Dave's saying with regards to like frameworks taking care of stuff, like we had mentioned cross-site request forgery earlier, and that's something that can be automated away with like Rails. It's automatic with Django and Node. You can easily implement CSRF protections. With cross-site scripting, a lot of the templating languages that frameworks offer automatically escape. I mean, there are definitely ways to screw it up, but there are built-in ways to, or there are built-in, it's built into auto encode, auto escape, potentially malicious user supplied input. I would say there's ORMs and active record. We've talked about active record patterns and ORM helping to prevent against SQL injection, things like link or Rails active record, or hibernate. So there's that for SQL injection. That having been said, I'll say that I kind of differ a little bit on the thinking about how you get your security champions, because while you're saying, you want your security champions to sort of be in the training because they're going to be motivated to actually, learn. One thing that I had talked about before, I don't know if it was on this podcast, was we had at Living Social, we did the Stripe CTF and publicized it. Well, the developers brought it up to us, and then we obviously spread the word about the Stripe CTF because it was like an AppSec sort of focused CTF. And from that emerged security champions. So I think you're talking more about instructor-led training, but I think that but I do think there's other mediums and other types of training where you can certainly identify your security champions. And then maybe at that point, those are the folks you want to progress to another level of like instructor-led training.
Yeah, or senior level people, I think, would get more out of it than junior level people, to be honest. Secure code training, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I can see your point, Dave, on having trained developers in the past, just knowing the interactions that I have with developers based on their experience varies so widely, and it's mainly due to their interest in the topic level, right? But when you look at the compliance frameworks don't give you an option, right? You look at PCI or FFIC or whatever, right? Like all these different compliance frameworks basically go out and they say your developers must have secure code training, right? Period. And so most of them do turn to instructor-led training, or like some of the secure code warrior, some of the other like online trainings to actually fulfill that requirement. But I do question how much of that is actually sinking in.
Yeah, especially I remember when we were teaching the class, Seth, that there would be people in the class that they were like, why am I learning about encoding HTML? I do back-end development. They do they're like mainframe people, or they wrote glue code to connect two systems internally or something. And for those people, it probably is a waste of time to talk about HTML encoding. And those
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to target a training course, like a generic secure coding course, when you don't know the developers that are going to be sitting in there, right? It just
What?
is.
That has totally happened well, I know myself, and I'm sure all of you, like, you go and you have this awesome, well, in your opinion, awesome course. Obviously no one's ever like, oh, I'm going to deliver a shit course. You have what you feel is a really solid course, and you're going to go deliver it. And you work with the security team, and they're, your point of contact, your security point of contact at the company. You go to give the training, and this is something we talked about with Jim, and then they put in, the wrong folks completely, like you're talking about, where I have literally had classes that mostly consisted of people that do QA, people that do some CSS and design work, and maybe a couple back end people, and that's it. And like maybe one or two people from the security team who do like kind of everything, not just like AppSec. They just do everything, and they thought it might be interesting. And I mean, how do you develop a course that is right for those people? The answer is you don't. Not altogether. I don't think you do.
Well, yeah, and then if it's specific, like, oh, we're talking secure coding in Java, right? Okay, that front end developer may touch a JSP once every 2 years, but most of it is just to insert an import statement, right? And that's it. And so you've, oh yeah, I mean, so I guess it's not as controversial as you as you thought it would be, because I can see where it comes from.
It's not a problem, I think, with the training itself or the concept of secure code. It's a problem of execution. Like the organization that wants to send developers they want developers to write secure code, so they blindly pick names off a big list and say, okay, you 20 go this day, you 20 go this day. And but there's not any, like, they don't look at what these developers actually do. They're just like, you put in a big bucket, and there's such variety in what developers do. Maybe 25% might actually get something out of it in their daily work.
I can't initially, like those initial courses that we did, I can't tell you how many times I had like a project manager in there that didn't know what an IDE was, right? And I'm just like, I don't know what to do with you for 8 hours.
Yes, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to be fair, it's gotten better since then, but I almost feel like it's what you're saying, it's a miscommunication problem. It's a problem with understanding what developers need. And the organization wants a one-size-fits-all approach, right? They want to be able to say, oh, you're a developer? All right, you're coming on board. We're going to give you this training your first week, and it means that you are certified, right?
Yeah.
And you will never write a SQL injection vulnerability. Yes, you may just be a mobile app React Native developer, but you will never have this problem that was a really big problem 10 years ago, right? So, so how do you think that we change that paradigm, or how do we actually push that edge and get those people to understand this?
Yeah, because I'll add this to it. People think it's as simple as like, well, why don't you just tell the security point of contact? Whoa, hold on. Like, there are so many layers in between usually a consultant and the actual point of contact at security. And even if your point of contact at security on the security team was the person who even purchased the training. And then within their company, there's likely levels of different people coordinating to see who will come to the training. And often it's like, please come to the training, send 1 or 2 people from departments. And then, so that's on their side. There's this whole, like, it gets convoluted on who's actually showing up. And then on the actual procurement side, you're sitting there with sales, pre-sales, project managers, the head of AppSec for the consultancy. And then eventually somehow in there, you're the one who becomes the person that, all that stuff happens before you ever get to it. And you're like told to deliver a course. So it's not as simple as just saying like, oh, well, just talk to your security point of contact, tell them, who needs to come. It gets convoluted. So yeah, all that in mind, how does that get fixed? Solve it for us, Dave.
Yeah, I think it would have to just communicating the best you can about what the course is, who would benefit from it, and who would not benefit from it. And so whoever your contact is, or whatever you can do up front before you show up to do the training, do that legwork up front to try to, make it clear what it's for. And but in the end, you can't control who shows up, and it's the organization decides who needs to be there.
Yeah. I was going to mention one of the people made an interesting, one of the viewers made an interesting comment. I don't know the real name, just this handle, but basically it said in the Netherlands, out of a 4-year computer science degree, there's a 2-month period of like just security training, kind of security best practices from like the outset. So it's sort of built into the computer science path. And their point being that it's better to kind of just that being like a core fundamental, just like, math would be considered a fundamental, or chemistry, or whatever the case is, English. So, I mean, I think that's awesome. I think like to have security as part of a core fundamental piece, but like, I don't know if that happens currently. We should get somebody on who's gone to college recently.
Some schmuck that paid $500,000 in tuition. So yeah, that's a good idea, because it's been a while since we've been to college, and certainly cybersecurity didn't exist when I was in college. So
yeah. I mean, the one security course that I had or the one that touched on security, right, in college was all cryptography, right? That was the only thing that they would want to talk about. So, I mean, I definitely know it's changed since then, but we could get somebody on to talk through that.
Well, just to kind of wrap up the discussion on training, as I remember a Twitter poll a while ago that someone had posted and said, like, if you have a web application, you don't know anything about its security posture, or if no, take that back. The phrasing was, what is the best way to start off an application security program when you're not doing anything? And like the choices were like developer secure code training, dynamic scan, static code analysis, and something else. And most people in the results of the poll chose developer secure code training. If you're not doing anything, how do you start? And I didn't. I chose dynamic scan, because you can very quickly get an idea of what your security posture looks like with a dynamic scan. It's quick and easy. You can maybe get some vulnerabilities fixed quickly, because you can find out about them. What's developer secure code training going to do for you, like in the near term? Not a lot. So I'm not opposed to it. It's just it's one piece of the puzzle, and it has to be done right, if possible.
There's a couple of things. Chris Gates made a good point. He said, this is in terms of, people not caring who they send, it might be a compliance requirements. They're just like, these people have to go do secure code training, box checked. So that's totally feasible. Definitely seen that before. Interestingly, Brian Gray said security is a core component at CMU. So somebody who knows about the curriculum, the more modern curriculum, says that in at least one place, there's security is a core component. So
see, and I mean, that's great, but I also think I also see CMU as more on the forefront of security in general, right? They always have been. I mean, we're talking Carnegie Mellon, right? And they've always been more concerned about security than, say, your local community college, right? They just have. It's going to be very dependent on who's teaching those courses, who's actually there. So yes, it's great that it's filtering down. I'm sure if you looked at like any of the online MIT courses, security is going to be in there, because it is what the engineers talk about, right? And it is what we're concentrating on more and more. But the filter down to the majority of developers is probably not as much as we think when we look at those big universities or big programs.
So when people run dynamic scans, like you said, that it gives you a pretty good, like a quick way to kind of gauge security posture of an app. So let's delve into that real quick, or it doesn't have to be quick. Let's just delve into it. So what are kind of the things that sort of stand out from results that kind of point to, okay, you need some work done to secure your application. Like, what are the typical things that would come back from those scans that indicate? Yeah,
It's still cross-site scripting. It's unencoded characters getting sent back in the response. But typically you see that with some of the older legacy web apps that are getting scanned. Don't see it a lot with the more, Angular, React apps, the, heavy Ajax, single page app type of things as much. A lot of times because the response is not text/HTML content type. It's application JSON or something. So it's not going to be exploitable necessarily. But still, cross-site scripting, we're seeing that a lot in our customer scans, just because so many web apps still out there that were built 4, 5, 6 or more years ago.
Yeah.
Your app 10, 15 years ago, no cross-site scripting, right? None. It's secure, right?
And for those that aren't following along on that, like the text HTML being that the browser, if you put in script alert 1, right, or script alert XSS, the browser renders it back exactly. Then when it sees text HTML, it assumes that's HTML content, renders that. And then for the JSON type, it's different. It's not interpreting that content as HTML and assuming it should render that HTML string. The difference being when it hits the single page, well, the Angular, React single page, or whatever JavaScript's running in the browser, then something might happen. You might be vulnerable. So my question, Dave, is like, I would assume single page apps present a huge risk, or not a huge risk, sorry, a huge problem in the sense of a dynamic scanner working. Is that something you guys have had to tackle, or you dealt with, or? Because I know that you need to be able to simulate DOM events in order for that flow to sort of occur, and then you need to analyze like the results in the DOM. So I'm curious,
right.
If you're having that.
You're absolutely right. So our scanner at Qualis, our web app scanning product, it has a browser engine built into it, and so you're absolutely right. The web pages need to render in that browser engine. And then you need to fire events and see what requests happen, because it's really the requests that go to the server that's where the attack points are. And if you can't fire the JavaScript events in a single page app, you're not going to get any requests going to the server. So we've had to adapt to these new technologies. Angular a couple of years ago, React for the last year or so has been really super popular, and the crawling, the discovery part of the scan is really important, because if you can't find the requests and the URLs and the links, you can't do the testing, and so you're going to miss vulnerabilities. So we in Qualis product, we developed a sort of a feature internal to the scanning engine called Smart Scan that's designed to handle those single page apps, and a lot of the Ajax requests that happen as a result of the JavaScript events firing. But even then, in an automated way, there's times when you have to help the scanner along to get through some sort of a workflow. If you have any kind of like a multi-step operation in the web app, there's a form, multiple forms that you have to get through, and you have to enter certain type of data or certain values to get through that sequence. The scanner can't do it on its own. So that's where the configuration to get a better quality scan comes in. And so we use we have a Chrome extension that Qualis wrote called Qualis Browser Recorder that allows you to record your steps and your activity in your browser, so you can get through that workflow, and you save that as a script, and then the tool then can play that script back to help get through the workflows. So it's like a lot of things. With a dynamic scan, you can start very simple with an unauthenticated scan just by entering a URL, and you can certainly get results quickly that way. Especially with a cloud-based scanner like ours, you don't even need to install anything. You just need to log in and enter a URL and go. But with the authentication, that's in one level to get through the authentication of the web app, and then also if you have those business workflows, That's another sort of advanced configuration that you can do. So it's all a matter of, what kind of resources do you have? What type of web apps do you have? The more time that you can spend configuring a scan, maybe the better those results will be. But the flexibility of any scanner there is important.
Okay. So you're using sort of like and if, because it could be like once you fill in a form based off of what happens, there could be like 3 or 4 different paths or more or whatever that the sequence goes through. So is that sort of like you as the tester or person configuring it, you just walk through, can you literally just do, each thing that might trigger the different sequence, and it'll just like be a recorded set of steps and that's it?
Yeah, you can record multiple sequences and they'll all play back during the scan to at least during the crawling phase, so that you can discover the AJAX requests or whatever requests are going to the server at that point. And then so those would be tested later on. Once those requests are recorded and you know what the requests look like, if it's an AJAX request, it may be a post request with, JSON payload or, request body. So those are recorded during the discovery or the crawling process. And then once that's done, the vulnerability test can be done, because at that point what the request looks like, where are the injection points, whether it's name value pairs in the request or it's JSON payload. You can do your injections for SQL testing, cross-site scripting, open redirects, all those kind of things.
Are there any vulnerabilities that you've seen because I imagine you all have a lot of metrics. If you're doing this in the cloud, and like I obviously you would want to anonymize the data, right? You're not going to be like, oh, this company's got these vulnerabilities every year, but you anonymize the data. But I'm sure you have the data in terms of are there any trends? Are you seeing less of one type of vulnerability or more of another type of vulnerability?
Yeah, definitely. We do have that anonymized data, and I think the one thing that stands out is less and less cross-site request forgery.
Interesting.
Yeah. So even SQL injection, right? I know from my own just anecdotal or qualitative perspective doing tests, I see very few SQL injections compared to when we started testing, right? I remember it was every other app or so, but nowadays if it's 1 in 10, that's a lot.
Yep, I agree with you. I would put SQL injection as much in the same category as cross CSRF, as far as less and less over time. We see less and less of that. Things that we still see all the time are the missing secure and HTTP only on cookies, those sorts of things. Also the security headers. There's all kinds of security headers from CSP and X-frame options and XSS protection. All the security headers and the responses that could be added. Typically, we don't see a lot of web apps using those or taking advantage of those, because it does take time to understand the nuances, especially with CSP. How to configure that, and it's kind of an advanced topic, to be honest, and a lot of web apps are written quickly, get it out the door. No one spends a lot of time to really lock that down. But the security headers is something that I think are not being taken advantage of out there in the world right now.
Oh, we would agree with you for sure. We've had this conversation for a couple podcasts, and I think because Jim was asking during the what was this? God, why can't I remember the name of the CSP? Do you remember, Seth, the name of the CSP directive that was somewhat lax, but was sort of just an
File access origin, right?
No, it was well, I'll figure it out.
Secure transport.
Inline.js?
But it was in CSP. Yeah. So yeah, it was a CSP directive that was basically kind of like a default. It was somewhat permissive, but it was a start. And the reason being that it's super difficult to implement a CSP. And then I guess for some folks to get the inline JavaScript out of there and make it external or put it into external files rather than inline. But yeah, you're right. Like we've talked about it, CSP is, for whatever reason, it can be difficult. And at the same time, you've mentioned XSS still being something that's prevalent, and it's like, just put a CSP policy around it. Yeah. It's easy. I mean,
I think
it's not easy, but it can be.
Time. I think it'll slowly be adopted over time. Just like same site attribute on cookies, we really don't see that happening much, but it's kind of a no-brainer to add that. So I think over time it'll start to be more prevalent.
It is so easy, and the thing is, it is so easy to introduce XSS. I introduced XSS once because I didn't know that the way it was when you do in Rails render, I think it was render plain text. The assumption being that only text is rendered, right? In that Rails version, it was text HTML content type. So when I was recording back an error, mainly for debugging with an OAuth flow, it was unbeknownst to me able to render in text HTML and render back whatever error, which if you input whatever you want in that error and have it echo back, you've got XSS. But it's easy to introduce, and CSP is just such an important piece of like preventing that or preventing it from being exploited.
Well, it's all those protections that are built in. I mean, nowadays the browser has so many different little knobs that you can twist, right? And back in the day, I shouldn't say back in the day, but years ago, right? All you could do was you had to protect it all on the server side, and the browser would render whatever you sent to it. But nowadays, you've got like some of those protections where your just XSS protection header, right? That one, it enables the engine that would detect that in Chrome and the newer browsers. But again, I always say if somebody's still using, IE6, right, they get what they deserve. But that being said, I still see, like I ran into an app where somebody had actually turned XSS protection off in the header, right? They'd gone to the trouble of implementing it, decided it wasn't worth it, and gone and turned it to 0 instead of 1. And I'm just like, what are we doing here, right? It is, you're going through all the trouble of actually implementing this header, and then you're turning it off, right? So, yeah.
What about serialization vulns? Do you find any serialization vulns out there?
So our scanning engine detects deserialization vulns, but it's really the CVEs, the ones that are known in the frameworks already. It isn't going to go out and discover some 0-day deserialization necessarily, but it has checks for the known CVE IDs that are out there that are deserialization related. And the thing the big one that we're just adding now, or in the process of adding, is out-of-band detection. So server-side request forgery, SMTP injection, some of those where you need a third external system that can identify the vulnerability through some DNS lookup. So we're adding those out-of-band detections. So I don't have any statistics on that yet, but as soon as those new detections roll out in the scanner, I'm going to be interested to see how many of those are out there.
So, Dave, is that something that Qualis would let you actually blog about and put up some of those numbers, just anonymized to talk through? That'd be really interesting for us to talk about and collaborate on, as far as what it is that you see from your scanning engine. I mean, that's super interesting to the community at large.
Yeah, definitely. We're all about that kind of information sharing. So we'd have to collect the data more recently to see what's going on. But yeah, I'll look into that, see if we can get something out there, and there's some numbers for you.
You guys talking about SSRF kind of made me think of because I have noticed an uptick in people discussing SSRF and finding that issue, and I'm wondering, I'm almost wondering if that is a result.
A lot of bug bounty researchers are finding that.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if the cause isn't partially just because we are deconstructing the monolith and having all these different services talking to each other, or if it's just more a greater set of bigger pool or set of eyes that's part of their like checklist, right? That they're familiar with, like, or they have good tests, we'll say, for SSRF. I don't know, but I have seen an uptick, like anecdotally, without hard stats, I've seen an uptick in it being discussed and found.
Yeah, it's something that I think it's probably increasing just because of the interconnectivity and the more systems are talking to each other in a programmatic way now. Whereas maybe in the past it was more, oh, here's a web app and there's a database and it's a one-time thing. But now it's just there's so much data being passed around from one system to another.
Yay, microservices!
Yeah. Yep.
Woohoo!
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is, right?
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to switch topics since the bug bounty thing came up. So unfortunately, I haven't had time. I mean, I wish bug bounties existed like maybe 6-8 years ago. I would have really enjoyed it. But I did get for about a year and a half. I did some bug bounties with a company called UTest, now called Applause. But they not quite like BugCrowd or HackerOne, but it was interesting because there would be projects and you could sign up for these projects if you were approved to be on the security testing team there. UTest was mainly, their main focus was like functional testing of mobile apps, but they had and they still have, I believe, a kind of a smaller security testing group. So I participated in that group for about a year and a half, and that was a lot of fun because you would sign up and you'd basically start testing. You'd have a window for doing your tests, and there'd be rules of engagement and a scope and all that. But it was mainly only certain people would be invited. So there might only be like 4, 5, 6 people on the team testing an application. So the scope was smaller, but there was a smaller team. So it was, and I was like the most senior person on the team. So I found a lot of stuff that was fun, and you'd have to write it up and submit it, kind of like writing a report back in the day as a consultant. But in this case, you got paid per bug. So that was interesting. Have you guys done bug bounties at all?
Well, the way you describe it sounds kind of like the participation we've done with SYNAC, or I've done a little bit of participation with SYNAC. The problem is I don't have like, with those things, you kind of have to spend a decent amount of, basically you have to concentrate for longer than my short attention spans allowing me to concentrate. Since I do the same thing for like a living every day, it's not necessarily like I want to go spend the whole also night doing that every night. You know what I mean? Like, so by the time something comes up and then, then it's within a 4 or 5 day window, it's like I may get to it for a few hours, but I probably have other crap going on too. So it wasn't super fruitful, but it is fun to occasionally go in there and just say like, oh, what's in scope? Because the scope, there's always new stuff kind of rolling in that's in scope, and sometimes stuff's just really interesting. There was one that was like it was a government site that is pretty important, and I won't I won't disclose what it does, but you had the source code and it was written in Golang, and it was like awesome. Like this is pretty amazing that you get the chance to look under the hood of how this app's running. So it was nice, but I mean, I never really made any money off of it. I mean, I probably could if like the attention span wasn't so short.
Yeah, you do have to focus for long periods of time, and you may not find anything, and then you find out you wasted a few hours, or you may find duplicates. In fact, there's a pretty good article I just read yesterday that someone had written about, basically make sure if you're a bug bounty, especially if you're doing bug bounties full time, make sure you take care of yourself, because you can get like sucked into the bug bounty world where you work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, and you can get burned out.
I saw that as well. I'm posting the article right now.
Did you read that? Yeah,
I did. I read it. It was, what was this? Nathan Security is the handle on Twitter.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah,
that's an interesting discussion, because it's like, I mean, I kind of feel like bug bounties are almost this like gamification of security, right? The leaderboards, the way that we approach it, we all have like our, our methodology, right? Like this is our like game plan for finding vulnerabilities, and we're racing against other people. So the gamification of it actually does induce the same things that we see in gaming, right? And that's what he's talking about, right? Is it's very easy to get sucked in and spend 10, 12 hours on a site, right? And like I did it for a good couple of months at one point where I was putting in a fair amount of effort, and it did pay off, right? But exactly what you're saying as far as finding like duplicates or finding things that are out of scope or whatever, right? There's a lot of things that you end up uncovering that may or may not actually make that time worth it, and so you've got to be really careful about how much time you spend and keep track of that. But the whole gamification section also means that there's reputation points that go along with that, right? You want to be on that leaderboard. You want to be in that top 100 list or top 50 list, so you get the goods for the next round, especially on those invite ones. And like it can be extremely detrimental to real relationships and really like living in the world, shall we say? So.
It can, yeah. It's a little bit like addictive in some ways, and kind of like gambling, and because there is money involved. But I remember doing the bounties, and when I was about to find something, or I thought I found something and I just needed a little bit more testing to confirm it, my heart would actually start racing. Like, man, this is going to be money. Not just money, it was fun. But at the same time, there's a little bit of an addicting aspect to it that you have to be careful of. So yeah, that article is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who I wouldn't say run, but is one of the people on the team triaging these bug bounty submissions that come in, it's a good reminder of how important that it is to be clear in your communication. If it's a duplicate, maybe even say, hey, good job. Yes, it's a duplicate. And if possible, maybe, depending on severity, maybe you can even throw a thank you in for it being a duplicate. Or if, your team has decided, hey, this is something internally we had discussed, but it's not something we can live with the risk. It's not a big deal. Again, maybe you can send a thank you, communicate. Like when I say a thank you, I mean, you can give, like even as little as a couple $100, we'll say, as a thank you for their time. And, but like really beyond the money part, just being very clear in your communication and having some empathy and kind of, I don't know, just not being terse and, blunt or terse and, that's just not being terse, being communicative.
You mean as someone who's triaging the bounty or the submissions, right?
Right. Yeah. On the other side of it, for making sure that, that you, because you want the people participating to come back, and also to, not burn out like this article talks about. So
yeah, absolutely. I remember at Sabre, I wanted to explore the idea of bug bounties, because it was just starting to become a thing at that time, and I didn't think it was ready for, or either Sabre was ready or the bug bounty programs were ready. But I remember you guys know about security.txt?
Yes, the little it's like robots.txt, but for the
for the security researchers that find vulnerabilities. They just it should be a standard. To me, it's a great idea. Like, have a little text file on your site that says, hey, if you find a vulnerability on one of our systems, here's what you do. Here's who to contact. Here's the proper procedure. Unfortunately, I couldn't even get them to interested in doing that. So but security.txt is a great idea. It's easy to do. I wish every organization did it.
Yeah, it can be tough. I mean, that's often you see why like security people move on, is when they, like, can you blame someone if you receive too much pushback when you're trying to improve things and you actually care? Right. It's the same thing as like, being polite and communicative with your bounty researchers. Like, you don't want to burn people out on like, hey, I care, I'm trying to help you, and then you're pushing back and not giving any good reason. So
yeah.
Well, we are coming up on an hour, Dave. I mean, this has been. Sorry.
Yeah, we are. There was one question that somebody just asked, John Doe, I guess. He's asking, I have a quick question. I've recently found that there's many environments that let you run code for testing with limited RAM CPU, but a gigabit connection, which is unmetered. This allows 300K PPS scans, right? Like, I guess, like.
What's the question? I'm confused.
I don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out, is what exactly he's asking there. Well, maybe it expands out.
Perhaps It's a two-parter.
It must be. So sorry. I thought there was going to be more to that.
No, and I like the fact that we got, because we were talking about this before we went live. We don't get. It's not often that we've only had one other person who was actually developing a security product on the podcast. That was Justin Collins, who congratulations, by the way, Justin. His Brakeman product was acquired by Synopsys. I still am curious to see what happens with that. Like, the break from what I understand, Brakeman still, like, there's still the open source version. I'm curious what happens with the with everything else. But anyways, point being, you're the only, out of 30 episodes, you're only the second person that we actually were able to pick, your brain on these things. So, like, thank you for coming on and talking, a bit about like what you're seeing these days.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. We appreciate it. Okay. John finally did, or John Doe, whoever it is, did finally finish his question. So through his scans, he's detected unprotected hosts with petabytes worth of info data in huge corporations. What would be the best way to report the issues and spread awareness of these types of unmetered systems? Yeah, I don't know. From my perspective, we're talking about the security tech stuff. I think that would be your first go-to, is figuring out who the security people are at those organizations. Otherwise, we're looking at something like a Medium post to talk about the generic issue that he's seeing. Are there other avenues that you guys see for releasing those sorts of vulnerabilities?
You mean to disclosing to a company if, like, you find, I'm not clear on the vulnerability, but like, and when you say unprotected hosts,
exposed data that's in the clear. It
might be difficult.
I guess that's what it would be. John, or whoever it is that's asking, if you want to hit us up, that sounds like a deeper issue that we could probably talk through on a subsequent episode, as far as exactly what it is you discovered. Like, we could talk about it in generics, or you could just give us a little bit more info about it and we could give you some advice, or you could even jump on the Slack channel if you're interested to talk through it. There's a bunch of people in there that work for different large organizations that would have good feedback on how to go about approaching something of that magnitude, right? Even Dave, your expertise on your expertise on, like, when you went through with CSRF and Netflix, right? It's not necessarily an easy thing to push through some of those organizations. So,
yeah, and the thing is, I didn't know it at the time, but when I reached out to Netflix to tell them about the problem, I was fortunate they didn't accuse me of hacking them and try to prosecute me, because at the time I was so naive and such a noob that I didn't know that sort of thing happened. But now, if I found that type of thing, I probably wouldn't say anything, just because there are organizations that if you try to be the good guy and tell them about their problems, they'll still accuse you and try to prosecute you for hacking.
Actually, so since we're on the topic, and Chris Gates, these are kind of connected. So Chris Gates made a comment that's why I started laughing. Was he said, hit up the CTO on LinkedIn, which was like why I started laughing. That's pretty good. That's pretty clever. Chris Gates actually was around for this story. So real quick, on that note, I no longer ever report anything or even like touch DoD stuff. Back before I started with y'all, I found SQL injection in an Oracle backed, because I had this, where's the book? I had, what's his face? Litchfield's, Litchfield's Oracle Hacker Handbook. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
and I worked for, at the time, I contracted for the Pentagon. So I was doing this stuff sometimes on site and sometimes remotely from my house. Anyways, long story short, I was using like Google hacking. I found what I was looking for, Oracle SQL injection string wise, in a military site, and reported it. I was like, I don't know who to report this to. So I reported to a friend of a friend, and that friend of a friend ended up being Chris Gates. So he forwarded on the information. So next thing I know, I've got an NCIS case and investigator assigned to me. And we still talk about it to this day, because I was shitting my pants. I thought for like, honestly, for 2 years, I was kind of waiting for the handcuffs. I was waiting for, them to raid my house and tell me, like I'm a criminal. And it was because they had a really, again, a very basic Oracle SQL injection on a very, very important site. I was in the Navy, so I knew it was an important site. I knew what it was used for. And again, went through the proper channels, like a friend of a friend. And I believe Chris Gates was working on the red team at that time. Anyways, that's sort of the story there. But yeah, that's why if I come across SQL injection in the DoD's most important site, I'm not saying a word. I mean, you can all have that. I mean, I won't touch it, so anything DoD, you won't ever see me. The one exception being for, SYNAC and that having access to that source code, but that was all, legal agreements and protected and all that stuff. So
yeah, I don't blame you, Ken.
Yeah. No, I was working with you guys while I was still like, fingers crossed. So yeah.
Now, so why didn't you disclose that in the interview? Come on, man. That's like important information.
Chris says no more free bugs. That's exactly right.
No more free
scare
bugs.
Me into thinking I'm going to prison. Yeah. No more free bugs.
Word.
Well, yeah, thanks guys for having me on. I appreciate it. If anyone wants to say hi, I got a really busy conference schedule coming up. So like the month of October is crazy. I mean, I'll be at Security Congress, ISC Squared Security Congress in New Orleans. I'll be at LASCON in Austin. I'll be AppSec USA in San Jose. BASC, the Boston Application Security Conference. So yeah, if you're at any of those, definitely come up, say hi.
Awesome. I know John Pullen and John Callahan, I saw on Twitter, they got accepted. So they'll, I don't know if you know them, but we can always intro. They'll be at the Boston one, and then we'll see you at AppSec USA.
Yeah,
cool. Yeah, I just got an email from the BASC group today asking me if I could do a talk. So I may be doing a talk too.
You should. You should. You've got good things to say.
Hey, you've got a lot of good data. Come on, just start presenting on the data. That'll be good.
Sounds like a whole nother project I didn't plan on, but yeah. Maybe I can come up with something or rehash something else.
No, so the data would be interesting. CSRF, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, the data would be interesting. Honestly, it really would be like showing trends over time. Because we're all curious, like what for somebody who has access to that kind of data, like like I said, what's going away, what's becoming more of a problem.
Yep, it's all available and being anonymized, of course.
Of course.
Of course.
Seth, did we have anything to mention before?
Not really, outside of the fact that our secure code training, right, or like how to conduct secure code reviews training for AppSec USA is actually filling up. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and register. I don't know how many seats we're going to have available, but we got notification this week that it's getting full. So there may not be that many seats still available. That's towards the end of October, or middle of October. Sorry.
Yeah, we got AppSec Melbourne.
Yep, AppSec Melbourne. I am going to push out some Hacker Tracker updates here pretty quick. There's some new conferences that are going to be supported by it, TorCon and DerbyCon. So if anybody's interested in that, for sure watch your iOS version or your Android version, and you'll see some updates and you'll see some other content getting pushed into that. More and more of those conferences will be in there. I think that's everything from my end, Ken. Dave, once again, it's good to see you, even just virtually, right? It's been a while. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. We'll see you next month then in San Jose for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we'll do a special, Absolute AppSec. I don't know.
I noticed something that I wanted to call out. Seth, I noticed your shirt. Can you show your shirt real quick?
Yeah, sure. It's Beats by Schrute. Yep.
I love it. I love that show. I love Dwight Schrute. It's awesome. Yeah, I caught a glimpse of it. I'm like, oh man, that's an awesome shirt.
I figured you would enjoy it, right? So, but
is there anything you want to leave people with, Dave, before we sign off?
Well, just I would say thanks everyone for listening and watching. Support your local OWASP chapter. And this is my OWASP beer mug that I'm drinking water out of. But anyway, thank you guys again. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Yeah. Thanks for coming, Dave.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Have a good night, everyone.